My name is Lisa Singh. I'm the CEO of the Australia-India Institute, and since the Institute's establishment in 2008, it has built an influential network across business and academia and government in deepening bilateral ties between Australia and India. And through our education work, we provide research reports and analysis and knowledge sharing activities, shaping engagement across the sector, supporting market entry, boosting networks, and activating conversations and collaborations. In 2023, our work has a strong focus on building engagement and networks between the skills sectors in both of our countries. And this suite of work includes a visitor exchange program, research projects, and of course, our Skills Masterclass series that will support Australian skill providers to explore opportunities to supplement India's capacity in skills development and to promote successful examples of Australia-India skill partnerships. It's a very exciting program of work, and it's a vital program of work as in many ways, education is the lifeblood of both of our communities. So we are very grateful to the Australian Government Department of Education's support of these masterclasses and the Institute's broader work in the education space, because education is an important program area for our Institute and for our two countries. Finally, I would like to thank NEPA for spearheading the successful delivery of the first 5 masterclasses, which includes today's seminar. The wealth of knowledge shared through these sessions will, I am sure, serve as a valuable asset for Australian vet providers seeking to engage with India for many years ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. As Lisa pointed out, these masterclasses are supported by the Australian Government Department of Education, and I'd like to invite Liz Campbell Doring to say a few words on. Liz is the Director of the South Asia section of the Department of Education. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Karen. Very much like to echo Lisa's comments and also extend my thanks to the Australia-India Institute for convening and doing all of the work to make this masterclass happen. We're absolutely delighted that we've got to this stage in the masterclass series and really see that there's huge potential for mutual benefit in the Australia-India skills relationship. With a rapidly growing economy and a large young population, India has a really ambitious agenda for skilling its people and has pursued a really ambitious agenda of more closely aligning supply and demand of skilled labour. And from our distinguished speakers today, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the demand for quality vocational education and training in India, which we think is only set to grow, and to hear more about how Australian vocational education and training providers are well positioned to partner with India in building a strong and skilled workforce for India. We obviously have a long history of engaging between our two nations in skills, a relationship that is now in the government led by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. But there is a number of initiatives across the Australian government that are working to strengthen the skills relationship, including a bilateral memorandum of understanding in vocational education and training, the Australia-India Future Skills Initiative, which connects Australian vet providers with Indian business and governments, students and employers. And last month, the mechanism on qualifications recognition between Australia and India was signed, which forms a really strong foundation for further cooperation between our education sectors. So would like to close with just again thanking the distinguished speakers today and also NAIPA for all of the engagement and bringing us to this stage with the masterclasses, and really hope that today's webinar along with the other videos in the masterclass series will serve as really valuable resources to encourage all of us to think of different ways of partnering between Australia and India in skills. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Liz. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Vinita Saroyi from the National Institute for Educational Planning and Administration, NEPA. We've partnered with NEPA in the delivery of these masterclasses, and we're really fortunate to be working with Professor Vinita and with NEPA on them. So for those of you who have watched the previous masterclasses, Professor Vinita probably needs no introduction. She's the lead researcher in the area of skill development and vocational education and training at NEPA, and she's also chairperson of the steering committee for the MPhil and PhD program, and she's also chairperson for the Equal Opportunity Cell at NEPA. As I said, she's led the development of these masterclasses, so I'm going to hand over to you, Vinita, and look forward to hearing the discussions that will follow. Thanks, Vinita.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Welcome to all of you for joining our webinar today on Skills Masterclass 5, Opportunities for Australian Vet Providers in India. This webinar will build on the first 4 pre-recorded masterclasses delivered by the India's National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, a premier organization for capacity building and research in educational planning and administration, not only in India, but also in South Asia. NEPA is very pleased to partner with the Australia-India Institute for the Skills Masterclass series, and is also thankful to the Australian Government Department of Education for their support. Let me take the privilege to introduce you briefly to the Indian skills landscape. It has a demographic advantage over other countries in terms of a huge proportion of population, more than half, in the working age group, and world's youngest population, around 54%, below 25 years of age. As we are aware, globalization and the new emerging technologies are changing the very nature of the work, with skills such as flexibility, adaptability, and lifelong learning being imperative. To meet the digital demand, or the educational institutions and the training providers need to collaborate with organizations to create an immersive learning environment, promote entrepreneurship, and upskill people. In this context, India has witnessed a major revamping of the skills ecosystem in the recent years with the 2015 launch of Skill India, the National Skills Development Mission of India, to address the mismatch between supply and demand of skills. Moreover, India's National Education Policy 2020 also creates an enabling environment providing opportunities for collaboration with international vet providers, including Australian stakeholders interested in broadening their horizons into India. We have 4 speakers in the panel, Mr. Kundan Kumar, Professor Vinay Swarup Mehrotra, Mrs. Sunita Sanghi, and Dr. Vinita Agarwal. Each speaker will be given 5 minutes to present their theme. So we start with the first speaker, but before I ask him to start his presentation, I would like to briefly introduce him. Mr. Kundan Kumar was formerly with Niti Aayog as Joint Secretary and Advisor looking after the 3 verticals, namely managing urbanization, skill development, labor and employment, and Industry 1. Recently, he has been posted to Bihar as the Resident Commissioner, Government of Bihar. He would be speaking on the policy framework of skill development in India. Over to you, Mr. Kumar.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Vinita. Good afternoon, Karen and other participants here. It is an absolute pleasure to be one of the speakers here in this webinar. And I would like to, first of all, extend my gratitude to Australia-India Institute and to NEPA for providing me this opportunity to record one of the 4 masterclasses on the policy framework of skill development in India. I've been given to understand that I have to speak on the 5 takeaways from the masterclass. The first thing that I would like to say that I have had the good fortune of being the PS or the Chief of Staff of the first Skill Development Minister of India. When Mr. Rajiv Pratap Rudy took over as the first Skill Development Minister, I was his Chief of Staff, which is called Private Secretary here. And I could see how a department matured, how it developed, how it took shape. And therefore, I generally try and speak with my experience. So the 5 takeaways about the skill framework. The first point is that India has a demographic potential, and this has been quoted enough. And at the outset, Ms. Vinita also emphasized on the same. And in this demographic potential, it is, if it's a big opportunity, it is also one of the challenges for the government. And it is good to see that the government has taken up the challenge. And by taking the challenge, what it required to do is to have the conducive kind of policy and conducive kind of institutional framework, which is my point number 2 and 3. And what happens, when you are the most populous country of the world, we also have the responsibility to have this workforce ready for the countries, which are showing dearth of labor or working population. So for that, we also have to collaborate with our international partners to see that, our workforce is skilled with the kind of standard which can be acceptable globally and internationally. While doing so, the government has also realized that while developing skills, maybe what we have done is that maybe we have created 2 separate buckets of education and skills, and therefore the aspirations of young population while they are undergoing a skill training is not being fulfilled, because skills at times is seen as a poor cousin of education. And therefore, this national education policy of 2020 came into picture, which presented a framework where education and skills can marry each other and can have and can be complementary to each other. Can I have the next slide, please? So I have already emphasized on the key point number 1, which is that India has a demographic potential, and the best part is that it has the potential to increase the gross domestic product by 6.1% if we do the skilling and upskilling of the working population that we are talking about. Next slide, please. I told you, while while the government had this realization and they wanted to come up with various reforms to provide a conducive environment, and it was in this effort that we had this National Skill Development Corporation, which was one of the biggest reform, where government realized that the kind of speed, scale, and standard which is required, it can be developed only by pooling in resources of not only of the government, but also of the private sector. And it has to be led by the industry. And therefore, this corporation, this company was created where private sector participation started coming in. That was a big change. And then the National Skills Development Policy was notified in 2019, but the more robust policy came in 2014-15, where a national mission was established, which was headed by the Prime Minister himself. And the 7 submissions, which were based on 7 different subjects separately, were also established, which were mainly created to have right kind of infrastructure, right kind of training, right kind of industry-led training. All this 7 submissions were also launched, and then came the National Education Policy. Next. this is the phase which shows how India's skill framework developed. When I say that it is from the initial phase was from 1950 to 2010, I would like to say that this was a classical phase in which it was being developed, not skills but a training during most of the industrial training institute came up during this time, and very less private participation was there. And the growth phase started with 2010 to 16, when most of these things, the experiment of National Skill Development Policy, National Skill Development Corporation, the more robust policy, the national mission, all came during this phase. And the consolidation phase was where we thought that there are multiple kind of training which are happening. There's a lot of duplication happening. We need to develop a smart MIS system. So this consolidation phase started during that time. And when I'm saying regulation phase was the time when we came up with a unified regulator, which also came up in the form of Sector Skill Council, NCBET. All these came up during that time, so that if this growth is happening, this should not happen haphazard, and we can regulate it in a manner that whatever skilling we do it with standards which can be globally accepted. Next point. Next slide, please. And our efforts have started showing this with the kind of bilateral agreements that we have and bilateral MOUs. The slide itself presents the kind of outreach Indian government is doing with various countries, as a result of which we have memorandum of understanding MOUs with 11 countries. And then we are also having a very robust relationship with Australia. And I've had the good fortune of visiting Australia during 2015-16. And I was very, very impressed to see the Skilling Institute that I could see in Melbourne, and also Melbourne, and also in Sydney. And therefore, our effort will be, I guess, will be completed only when we will be able to become the skill capital of the entire globe. And that is what we aspire for. And it is with this that, we are doing this outreach program. Next slide, please. This I've already said that, this is a time when, we are just trying to consolidate, and the consolidation is happening through national education policy. And national education policy, after national education policy, we have also come up, we have come up with national credit framework, which is again a far-reaching reform, which Government of India has introduced, which will bring equivalence between education and skills. And I hope that skills will no longer be the poor cousin of education. And we are trying to bring institutional unity and convergence. And while doing so, we are not forgetting that we have to maintain the global standards. And I'm very happy that Australia India Institute is doing a yeoman service, by this collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you for providing a comprehensive account of the various milestones covered during the journey of the skills policy reform and regulatory and institutional frameworks and efforts for scaling up the international collaborations for skilling. Now we move on to Professor Vinay Swarup Mehrotra, who is the head of the Curriculum Development and Evaluation Center and Center for International Relationship at the PSS Central Institute of Vocational Education under the Ministry of Education, Government of India. He is also the coordinator of the Univoc Network Center at PSS CIV, Bhopal. Let us listen to what he has to tell us about skill development programs and quality framework. Professor Mehrotra, please.
A very good afternoon and namaskar to all of you from India. It's indeed a great pleasure to be a part of this whole webinar, and also the videos that have been developed as the skill development in India is to be promoted, and Australia India Institute is joining hands with us in promotion of skill development in India. And that's a great beginning, and I'm sure this will be taken up on a larger scale, where we can also cover other aspects of vocational education and training. As has been already mentioned by Liz, that the mechanism for global mobility between Australia and India has been signed. And I was also a member of that committee which worked on this, and it was a pleasure to be associated with that committee. And the outcome is there. So I'm so happy to know that this has been signed. Now, coming to the key points from the Masterclass 2, which, as you can see, the integration of vocational education with general education. I'll be covering also how we need to respond to the needs of the labor market requirements, individuals and society. Then the third point, which says that leveraging the potential of ICT for promoting skill development activities is very important. And we need to also build capacity of vocational teachers or trainers through continuous professional development, which has been emphasized in the National Education Policy 2020. And it also mentions that at least 50 hours of CPD should be provided to the teachers to ensure professional development of the teachers, not just the vocational teachers, but also the general education teachers. And the work has already been started in this direction. We are also organizing webinars, seminars, conferences on teacher education to ensure, because as we all know, the teacher is the most important change agent in education system. So we need to also look at this aspect very intricately to ensure that the continuous professional development of the teachers take place. The fifth point, which I'll be covering, is on international collaborations for recognition of qualifications and preparing global workforce. And this has already been mentioned earlier by Liz, that this mechanism has been signed. Now, coming to the next slide, please. So the point number one, which talks about integrating vocational education with general education, we have covered in this video on the holistic education and skill development of learners. So as you might be knowing, that we are now having a scheme in the school education which is known as Samagra Shiksha, which means holistic education that we are providing. And this has been possible with the convergence of all other schemes which were existing earlier in school education. Now we just have one single scheme called Samagra Shiksha. So we are looking at the holistic development of the child, both in terms of physical, social, mental, and other means of development that needs to be done for a child right from grade 1 to grade 12. So we are also preparing learners for the lifelong learning opportunities, which is one of the most important agenda of UNESCO. We are also instilling the feeling of equality, self-worth, respect, and dignity of labor to facilitate upliftment of social status of vocational education. And that is why we are now going to provide vocational exposure from the middle stage, that is from grade 6 to 8, as per the National Education Policy 2020, with the introduction of bagless days, pre-vocational education program, and internship programs that we are going to implement. We have already developed, the NCERT, National Council for Educational Research and Training, has already developed the guidelines for bagless days and pre-vocational education program. And we are also now working on the guidelines for the hub and spoke model that would be implemented in the institutions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, also we need to respond to the needs of the labor market requirements, individuals and society, in order to fill that gap of knowledge as well as the skills that we have had in the system. So how do we close the gap between the skills required by the industry, that is the demand, and the skills people possess for availing employment opportunities, that is the supply? So there are a lot of skill gap studies which have been conducted by the National Skill Development Corporation along with other stakeholders like sector skill councils. And we have already started working in that direction since 2014, so that jobs are best matched with the skill sets and the interest of the people who are looking for such skill development programs. We are also building workplace competencies rather than just giving people mere qualifications or certificates. Earlier, as you all know, that people were more focused on looking at the marks and the qualifications or certificates, but now employers are looking for employable people rather than people who just having qualifications or certificates. So that is a paradigm shift which has taken place in our system, where competencies are being given more weightage rather than just the certificate. We are also focusing on future skills such as use of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, drone technology, mobile applications, the use of computers and designing. So as to build design thinking, critical thinking, analytical thinking. All these are being focused right from the school education to higher education. Next slide, please. So we are leveraging the potential of ICT for promoting skill development activities by preparing best quality content, which is accessible to all learners in the country free of cost. We are also providing greater access to ICT infrastructure, affordable devices, quality internet connectivity, as well as trained teachers and facilitators. We are developing relevant educational content and digital resources for skills development. Here, I would like to mention that besides developing videos or slide presentations, we are also now working on developing virtual skill labs. Besides the virtual labs that we have developed for the general education, we're also working on the developing virtual skill labs. So that's a big project that we are working, and then this will actually complement the physical labs and also increase the outreach to the students, particularly those who are in the rural areas. We are also bringing about increased awareness and enrollment in online hybrid courses. Like, for example, the PSS Central Institute of Vocational Education, Bhopal, is offering a diploma in vocational education training for professional development of the teachers through distance come contact mode. And we are working on expanding this DVET program with other universities by signing MOUs with them. So there are skill platforms like eSkill India platform, Bharat Skills, and all, which are providing both paid and free of cost courses to the target groups. Next, please. Then building capacity of vocational teachers or trainers through continuous professional development. This we are already doing, and we are coming out with different programs, capacity building programs, besides what we have been doing earlier for the school education particularly. So standardization and uniformity in qualifications for eligibility, tenure, professional development, salary, promotion, incentives, and recognition of vocational teachers is being worked on. We are also focusing on capacity building for employability skills, 21st century skills, green skills. You would be happy to know that our institute, PSSEI, we got European Training Foundation Award for 2021 on green skills. We are also promoting inclusive education, vocational pedagogy, vocational skills, ICT skills, and indigenous knowledge and skills through our capacity building programs, both for the school leaders as well as the teachers. We are garnering support of local experts, craftspersons, masters for developing competencies of teachers. And we are working on models where we can invite these master trainers from the world of work to the schools regularly so that they can become part of the whole exercise of training our students. Next slide, please. Now, this is the last point, which is on international collaborations for recognition of qualifications and preparing global workforce. So as also mentioned by Mr. Kundan Kumarji, that we are signing memorandum of understanding with countries like Australia, Belarus, China, Denmark, France, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, UAE, United Kingdom, South Korea. We are working very closely with South Korea, with KOICA particularly on funding, and South Korean embassy is supporting us in terms of both the equipment as well as the projects related to mechatronics. We are also working closely now with Finland. So NCRT has signed an MOU with Finland for strengthening VET, particularly for capacity building of the teachers. Information sharing and capacity building through bilateral agreements for implementation and recognition of best principles and practices. We are promoting it through the UniWalk. This is a UNESCO's international project on TVET. We are one of the centers of UniWalk here in ESSEIV, and we are serving as a clearinghouse, and also we are participating in most of the projects of UniWalk. Then, as mentioned earlier by Liz, that this mechanism on the recognition of Australian and Indian qualifications has been signed, and I'm sure with this the initiative, there'll be a lot of exchange of teachers and students between Australia and India for strengthening of the vocational education and training and skill development ecosystem in India. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Mehrotra, for sharing your ideas on a wide spectrum covering aspects such as holistic education, lifelong learners, teachers, and international collaboration. Now moving further to the mechanics of Indian skills ecosystem, I hand over to Mrs. Sunita Sanghi, former Principal Advisor, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and former Executive Member, National Council for Vocational Education and Training. Over to you, Mrs. Sanghi.
Initiatives to provide skilling to its varied kind of a population. And we all know that India is such a huge country, diverse countries, and diverse mechanism and methods and programs have been instituted, have been implemented to ensure that this youngest population is trained such that it not only meets the requirement of the domestic economy, but also of the international economy. And therefore, there is a focus on access to holistic and lifelong learning, because we know that the international and the national labor markets are changing day by day. It's not static as they used to be. They are changing, and to meet the requirement of the Industrial Revolution 4, which is happening, which has changed and brought about gig economy, the platform economy, the kind of jobs that are available are changing. So by leveraging our demographic, we are trying to make available the workforce, not only for ourselves, but also for the global economy to meet that requirement. And in this, the digital skilling initiative of the government of India, which is which is Future Skills Prime, which is skilling, reskilling.
So, sorry to interrupt. The slides are not moving.
I think it was the next slide.
The next slide.
The next one. Yeah.
Is
this was the leveraging the India's demographic. Yeah.
Okay.
So, through the digital skilling initiative of the Future Skill Prime, we are skilling, reskilling, and upskilling our workforce in the newer technologies. And Government of India, together with NASSCOM, a private partner, is making all-out efforts to ensure that we are able to skill our people in the newer technologies so that they are able to access the job opportunities. And this process of using the digital technology was speeded up thanks to the pandemic, COVID pandemic, because that showed us the way that we need to change the way we are skilling our people, the way we are working. So this digital skilling initiative has really ensured that we are able to make our manpower suitable for all kinds of jobs in the country. Second, next. my next takeaway was that while skilling is very, very important, it is also very important to ensure that they are effectively regulated. Effectively regulated to ensure that there is a proper quality, because we are looking at quality assurance and not quality control. And for quality assurance, we have an independent regulator. Now, prior to 2018, in India, we had a very fragmented regulatory structure. Now, because of the regulatory structure, we have a long-term training program, we have a short-term training program, we have very different kind of a regulation for both the training ecosystem. One was by the Director General of Training, another was by the National Skill Development Agency. And the standards, although there was a national skill qualification framework, but then the bodies were different. Similarly, we had some bodies there which were regulating in the provinces and the states of the government of, in India. So to make one single regulatory framework, the National Council for Vocational Education and Training was brought into picture, which has really given clarity of functions. Clarity of functions to different stakeholders in the regulatory space, whether it is a certifying body, whether it's assessment agencies, whether it is within the government, the bodies like National Skill Development Corporation or bodies like the Ministry of Skill Development or the other central ministries. This has really ensured that there are better outcomes and there is efficiency in training. Why? Because you have one body which is overseeing, which has all the regulatory pictures and instruments in place, whether it is in terms of guidelines for the awarding bodies, guidelines for the assessment agencies, or if you are wanting a blended learning, wherein you have both online and the offline learning, how do you do that? So those guidelines have already been issued by this independent regulator. Now, this independent regulator, to ensure quality, is also focusing on self-regulation. Self-regulation by the awarding body, by the assessment agencies, so that they are able to monitor on day-to-day basis, on a regular annual basis, on a continuous basis. Because on that basis only, their affiliation, their accreditation with the regulator is determined. There is a risk rating mechanism which they have developed. Based on that, their recognition within NCVT continues. The third important point for the effective regulation for quality assurance that we have undertaken is that there is a nationally integrated education and competency quality assurance framework to facilitate the mobility. As I said, that we have a diverse countries. The people who are there, their level of educations are very, very different. There has always been a divide between the school education and the vocational education. Now, through this nationally integrated education competency framework, an effort has been made to ensure that people who are, now suppose today they are in the school, they want to move to the world of work, they do the world of work, they want to come back and they want to enhance their capacities, they can do it. Because through this particular system, the National Skill Qualification Framework, which is now being which has now been strengthened to make a national credit framework, and if they are provided the mobility pathway so that they can do horizontal as well as the vertical mobility within the same profession and within the education level as well. Next point. Next slide, please. The third important point is that you need to have a qualified and accredited trainers. Professor Roop has already spoken a lot about that why trainers are required, because they are the mainstay of quality skilling. Unless and until we have well-qualified trainers, they will not be able to hand it down to their students the best practices. And what is required for that is that they need to have their experience in the industry. So through the DGT ecosystem, that the Director General of Training ecosystem, there is a training program which is running wherein the industry partners are actually coming to the training institutes, National Skill Training Institute, to deliver the training to the trainees who are going to be tomorrow's trainers. Through this, and they are also offering their workspaces, they're also offering their shop floors to these trainers so that they actually go to the industry and they can experiment, they can undergo training on the latest machines that are there. This way they are able to develop their competency. And this training is not only in the domain training, but the training is also provided on how they have to do the pedagogy and how they have to use a different technology. So there is a focus on enhancing the capacity of these training of trainers, and it is through the continuous professional development by using the ICT. Now, for this particular, there is a 15-day program which is mandatory for all trainers in a year to undergo training, so that they can actually recalibrate their knowledge, and they can actually make themselves in tune with what the industry is requiring. The third important point is, for the first time, like the regular teachers award, the ecosystem has introduced what we call a national system to recognize the trainers' excellence through the award to the Kaushal Acharya. We call it a Kaushal Acharya Award. So these awards are provided to the vocational training providers by the Ministry of Skill Development. Next. The fourth important point is...
Mrs. Sanghi, can you just wind up in 1 minute?
Yeah, the fourth important point is the industry partnership for reducing the skill gap, the mismatch and shortages. We all know that as I said, that the technology is changing very fast. While the job role may be the same, the way the processes are undergoing, they are changing. So the industry is able to participate through setting up the centers of excellence, through multi-skill centers, to setting up trade-specific labs, and through supporting the apprenticeship program in the industry. The last point is that we have, next slide please. The last point is that we have broad-based our financing, because given the challenge that we have to skill around 500 million people, it was very difficult for government to provide all the resources. So we have partnered with the private sector through the National Skill Development Corporation. We have also invented what we call a skill impact bond for leveraging the private sector expertise. And there are also support from the multilateral and bilateral agencies like World Bank, ILO, and ADBs to provide resources to us to expand our infrastructure and to expand our facilities, whether through the training of trainers, and to ensure the trainee participation, the skill voucher scheme has been introduced. And I think there are a lot of scope for the Australian training provider to participate in the Indian ecosystem, whether through the skill financing or through the making available quality teachers, or aligning itself with the awarding body and assessment agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Sanghi. We understand that broad-based skill financing would be a useful strategy. Needless to mention that challenges are inevitable with transformation in any system. So now let us move a little further to delve into the challenges and opportunities for Indian skill system reform and foreign involvement. For this, I'll hand over to Dr. Vinita Agarwal, who is an executive member, National Council for Vocational Education and Training. Prior to this, she was Director General, National Skill Development Agency, and Senior Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. Over to you, Dr. Agarwal, but I would also request you at the same time, since we are running short of time, to kindly restrict yourself to 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vinita ji. And thank you, Karen, Lisa, and Miss Elizabeth Campbell for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this seminar today. So I'll try and wind up in 5 minutes, the time allotted to me. Can we move to the first slide, please? Yeah. So these are the 5 key points or key takeaways from the session, the masterclass that I had taken. Can we move to the next? The first, of course, I don't want to delve too much on it because a lot of other panelists have touched upon it, that India, we know, is a young country. And second thing that I wanted to emphasize was that we have a limited training capacity. On one side, we have a huge demography. I wouldn't say dividend. To make it dividend, we will have to make them productive by giving them training and education. So the training capacity is limited because only 2.4% of the workforce has received formal vocational training and 8.9% through informal sources, because as you would know that India has a large number of people who are engaged in the non-formal sector. And then the major challenges that we are facing, this is on the opportunity side. We know that India, on one side, I mentioned India is a young country, but also on the other side, there is this aging world population. So I look at it as an opportunity for India, the Indian skilled workers to move there. The challenges that major workforce, as I said, is in the non-formal sector. Then, of course, the scale, we need a huge scale to cover this, to train these people. Then there are quality issues, there are multiple bodies, then there is geographical inequity. You know, India is a huge country, so not all areas are covered by the training facilities. Then, of course, the problem we are dealing with is low aspirational value of skilling, that people look at it as a last resort, and there is a demand and supply disconnect in spite of the fact that there is demand and there is supply. Next. Demand for skilled workers and supply of of people to work. So the second key point is, so coming out of that, if I look at the reforms that we have undertaken over time, the first reform is to expand the scope of skilling in India. So a large number of training institutions have come up. So we have long-term training, which is largely imparted through the industrial training institutes. We have over 15,000 industrial training institutes. And then the short-term training. Now, short-term training is for, say, a few months, maybe from 2 to 6 months, and to expand the reach, because we know that the workers, a large number of workers are engaged in the non-formal sector. So to expand the reach of training, we have this concept of recognition of prior learning. So where we assess the skills of these people, if there are deficiencies, we do a bridge course, and after that they are certified. And the third aspect that we are concentrating upon is apprenticeship training. There are over 1 million apprentices at present, because this is the most accepted form of training, in the sense that they are the products that come out of apprenticeship training have a ready job market. And of course, we are focusing on upskilling and reskilling, considering the technological changes that are taking place. Next, please. The third aspect is quality and employability of VET, which is a challenge in India, which has been a challenge. So a number of steps have been taken by the government. The first was the notification of National Council for Vocational Education and Training, which is a national regulator, which Ms. Sunita Sanghi had touched upon. So this was set up in 2018. This is the organization that I represent, and under it was consolidated all the fragmented regulatory bodies that existed in the skilling ecosystem. Then in NCVT, we have taken a number of measures to improve the training standards. That is our focus. So for that, we have undertaken recognition and regulation of awarding bodies and assessment agencies. These are the two main pillars of the skilling ecosystem. So far, 84 awarding bodies have been given recognition by NCVT and 54 assessment agencies. And their recognition is done against certain standards that we have developed, which are there, and only when they meet the standards, recognition is given to them. Then strengthening of national skills qualification framework. Since NSQF was notified way back in 2013, keeping in view the changing requirements of the skill ecosystem, the fact that technological changes are taking place very fast, a lot of things are evolving in the skill ecosystem in India itself. So a number of measures have been taken to strengthen NSQF. The main ones include that we have rationalized the NSQF levels from 1 to 8. That means earlier there were 10 levels, now we have 8 levels. The level descriptors themselves have been revised, and many other policy changes have taken place. Then to improve delivery of training, that is another very important aspect. We have brought out guidelines on blended learning. We are promoting blended learning. This is also expanding the reach, and this has actually happened more. This has moved faster after the COVID, and we are developing training of assessors and training of trainers standards. And another important thing that we have done, we have brought out standardization of certificates. So at the end of the training, earlier everybody was issuing their own certificates. Now there is a national certificate brought out by NCVT, and anybody who's a recognized body gets this certificate, gets to issue this certificate, which is a nationally recognized certificate. Next, please. The next important point, reform, which we have brought out, is basically to make skilling aspirational. That is the main challenge that we have been dealing with. So what we have done is that there is NCVT is placing a lot of focus on future skills. Already 299 qualifications in future skills have been developed. And these are across sector, not only in IT, but they're across sector. Even in agriculture, we find a number of future skills that have come up. Then we are promoting multi-skills, the training in multi-skills, cross-sectoral skills, guidelines for all these have been developed by NCVT. And another important thing that we are doing is that we have instituted an approval mechanism for national occupational standards and even smaller modules, which we call micro credentials. This will facilitate even the corporates, whatever upskilling they undertake, so they can issue a certificate which is nationally recognized and which will help the trainees to get credits. Then another initiative taken is introduction of employability NOS. There is a NOS on employability skills, which has been included in all qualifications across board. And this includes 12 modules. So it has components like communication skills, digital literacy, financial literacy, how to face an interview, how to communicate with the customers, 21st century skills. All these skills are included, and this is a mandatory part of all qualifications. Another very important initiative that has been taken by the government is the implementation of the National Credit Framework. Now, this NCRF seeks to remove all boundaries between academic education and vocational education. So it will enable creditization of academic, vocational, and experiential learning across school, higher education, and vocational education. It will permit multiple entry and multiple exit options and help in mobility amongst all these streams. Next, please.
Can you please wind up in 30 seconds,
Yeah.
please, ma'am?
Sure. So my last takeaway is the opportunities for international collaboration. So we are looking at development of qualifications as per global skilling standards, mapping them for mutual recognition, and there are opportunities for the foreign providers to get involved as a NCVT recognized body, as an awarding body, or an assessment agency, or even as a training body. And we are looking at, as per NCRF, we are looking for mutual collaboration for equivalence of courses, for provision of credit transfers, and for promoting exchange across various institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for illuminating insights into the challenges and opportunities in the Indian skills ecosystem. Now, let us probe further for some more information and clarifications which the Australian vet providers would be interested in. I would be opening the questions to the panel members. Each member will be given only 30 seconds to respond to their respective question because we are short of time. So the first question is to Mr. Kundan Kumar. In Skills Masterclass 1, you articulate the scale of demographic dividend India that is likely to last for another 20 to 30 years. Can you expand a little on what this opportunity represents for institutions working in the vet and skill sector, either for local providers or for foreign vet institutions keen to support this burgeoning sector? Mr. Kumar, please.
Thanks, Ms. Vanitha. When I said India has the demographic dividend, and that I think was echoed by each speaker, I guess. In that, I see for the institution a great role to play. All the institutions, either from India or Australia or across the globe, there's a business opportunity. There's opportunity to scale up. There's opportunity to bring in technology through which we can have the access. There's an opportunity where they can help us achieve the standard, that the global standards that we want to achieve. So I see a lot of opportunity for all the vet related organization in all the 7 submissions that I spoke about, whether it is infrastructure for skilling, whether it is standardization for skilling, whether it is training, or whether it is entrepreneurship, which is related to skilling. So I see a lot of opportunity for all the vet related institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Now the question is to Professor Vinay Swarup Mehrotra. In Skills Class, Masterclass 2, you provide some great insights in the Center of Excellence approach for skills development in specific industries like emerging technologies. Can you please share an example of how this is working and some of the technology subsector skills that are now being taught? Professor Mehrotra, but please restrict to 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly mention about the guidelines for recognition of Center of Excellence, which was issued by the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in 2019. Thereafter, various centers of excellence came up. And the first one was, this was between the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Ministry of Education France, and Schneider Electric India. They started this along with the Power Sector Skill Council. So as you are all aware that we have now 37 sector skill councils which are working in the skill development ecosystem. And Power Sector Skill Council was the major force behind this, getting this MOU signed along with the National Institute of Solar Energy of the Government of India. And this Center for Excellence is actually working on preparing skilled workforce in the domain of solar systems. So as we are all aware now that we are focusing on green energy, green growth, green economy. So there are other now centers of excellence in dairy, that is dairy skills in India, automation, maritime and shipbuilding, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you,
yeah,
Professor.
Thank you.
And I now move on to Mrs. Sunita Sanghi for the next question. In Skills Masterclass 3, you outline key structural elements of the VET sector in India. Prior to 2018, the regulatory framework was described as quite fragmented. Can you please share with the audience your perspectives on how the National Skills Qualification Framework and NCVET are working now to consistently align VET training outcomes across India? Mrs. Sanghi, please. You're not audible. Are you there, Mrs. Sanghi?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Actually, the national policy, if I just go back, the national policy 2015 had clearly indicated that one nation, one standard, to ensure that national standards and quality for skilling are consistent throughout India as also with the globally. That is what the National Skill Qualification Framework, when it organizes the qualification according to level of knowledge, skills, aptitude, and these are approved by National Skill Qualification Committee of NCVET, irrespective of which state, which country, which level, the same level is across the country. So it is through these levels which are defined in terms of learning outcomes that the learner must accept, which are approved by the NCVET through its NSQC, that they are trying to bring about uniformity in the outcomes. Secondly, it is, I think, through what Vinita ji had said, standardization of certification is the same. There are same guidelines which are governing different awarding body assessment agencies. And now the National Credit Framework will also ensure, which will be implemented by the NCVT with the help of UGC, to ensure that the VET training outcomes are same across India.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Sanghi. The question to Dr. Vinita Agarwal is, in Skills Masterclass 4, you outline the opportunity for foreign providers to become National Credit Framework recognized bodies to deliver VET content in India. Can you elaborate a little on the pathway to accreditation and some of the key requirements a foreign provider would need to meet? Dr. Agarwal, please.
So we can, so there are various ways in which the foreign providers, we have opened the pathways where the foreign providers can get associated with the skilling in India. The first is development of qualifications. So these can be qualifications can be developed by the Australian side also, and these qualifications can be developed as per the requirement of the destination country, their standards and their requirements, so that they have acceptability there. So the training courses and qualifications that we mentioned of some global OEMs like Red Hat have already been aligned to NSQF. Then second way in which they can partner with us is that credible industrial houses or foreign providers can get involved either by becoming a recognized awarding body of the NCVT or by becoming a training provider under a recognized awarding body. And such training will lead to a nationally recognized certificate, and this will also enable the trainees to get credits under the National Credit Framework. Then these bodies can also seek recognition as an assessment agency. And let me mention Pearson VUE is one of such bodies which has recently received recognition of NCVT to conduct assessments for NCVT approved programs. Then we have come out with a simplified template and process for them to become a partner with us in this process. So we have the standards or the guidelines which are there to become an awarding body and assessment agency. These have been streamlined and simplified for the foreign providers. These will be very shortly uploaded on our website. Before that, if anybody is interested, they can get in touch with us at NCVT. And lastly, last way is that, like I had mentioned in the international collaboration opportunities, that the institutions and universities can also get together for recognition of courses, for credit transfer, and for promoting exchange of students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. I think the questions have been clarified, and for details, we would advise you to watch the video series that are being recorded for these master classes. Now, I open it for audience questions if Karen permits, and if the time is there. Karen?
Thanks very much, Professor Vinita. I think we've got one question, which is about the recognition of qualifications. So we have a question. Could we know a little bit more how close India and Australia are to getting a skills recognition framework? Is the Australian Skills Qualification Authority involved in these discussions so that there's a clear path for Australian TAFEs to work more closely with vocational providers in India? I think half of that question might be for an Australian panel, but perhaps there's a panelist who knows how close Australia and India are to getting skills recognition framework.
So can Dr. Vinita Agarwal respond to
say something on this? Yeah. So I think the Australian side would be aware that very recently a joint there was a task force and a joint understanding has been reached between India and Australia, where recognition of qualifications is an important aspect of that. So ultimately, the framework is there. So now the certain qualifications will have to be taken up individually for recognition. So the framework very much exists, and we are also in conversation with the Australian side. In fact, just 2 days back, we had a meeting with them for starting this process. So this is already underway.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Agarwal. And now since there are no questions, we would wrap up. I would like to highlight some of the key messages that we got through the deliberations. One is the factor that has been consistently echoing is the demographic potential, with more than half of the Indian population in the working age group and the youngest population. Second, making skilling aspirational, supported by the National Credit Framework, which would increase the number of takers for VET and facilitate both horizontal and vertical mobility. Third is the effective regulation for quality assurance and integration of technology and industry partnerships supporting apprenticeship, which can also go a long way in improving the VET sector. The fourth message is that the financing is an important component in the management of skills programs, and an approach of broad-based financing, those skills through skills vouchers, partnership with private and multilateral agencies could be promising strategy in managing the funds for skills program. Then coming to the fifth message, For international collaborations, we can explore possibilities through harmonization of global skilling standards, mapping qualifications for mutual recognition, credit transfer, and exchange programs. So I think the webinar has provided some valuable insights into the opportunities available for Australian vet providers to participate in the India's rapidly increasing, expanding skills ecosystem. So friends, the stage is all set. With the recent policy initiatives, you need to move to action. I conclude by stating that hope is the belief in the probability of the possible. Analyze the landscape, take the opportunities, and make them fit for you. It's your move. Thank you all for being with us. Most rightly said, gratitude is the attitude which gives the fortitude. So before I request Dr. Karen to propose a vote of thanks, I must thank Dr. Karen and her team for their unstinted support in conducting the webinar. And now I hand over to Dr. Karen to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Vanita. Well, I'd like to thank all the expert speakers who contributed to the series of masterclasses to date and who've joined us today to recap on the masterclasses that they delivered earlier. I'd especially like to thank Professor Vanita Sarowi for organising our masterclass series, these first 5 masterclasses on skills, and to thank the experts who've joined us today, Sri Kundan Kumar, Professor Vineswara Mehrotra, Ms. Sunita Sanghi, and Dr. Vanita Agarwal. Thank you all very much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. For our audience, thank you for joining us too. Please, I encourage you to watch the first 4 masterclasses that are recordings, if you haven't already done so, and to keep an eye out for the next 5 masterclasses in this series of skills masterclasses. If you subscribe to the Australian India Institute newsletter, you'll get early warning of the topics coming up later in the year. And finally, I want to say thank you to the Australian Government Department of Education for supporting these masterclasses. I think they're absolutely important to help the Australian vet vocational education training sector understand India's sector and better know how to participate and engage with the Indian skills system. It's a very exciting time in skills in India, and it'd be great for Australian sector to be more involved. So thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at future masterclasses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karen and Professor Vinita Sarowi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Namaskar.